There are two tropical systems developing right now, one in the Atlantic, one in the Pacific, and both of them could impact land within days. In the Atlantic, things are finally waking up after weeks of quiet. Tropical Storm Cristobal has already formed, the third named storm of the season. But the bigger concern is Invest 92L, which has an 80% chance of becoming a depression and could bring heavy rain to the northeastern Caribbean this weekend. In the Pacific, Invest 93C has been reclassified as Potential Tropical Cyclone One-C, and forecasters have given it a 90% chance of becoming Tropical Storm Lala. The big island of Hawaii is in the crosshairs. Impacts are expected this weekend. Two separate systems, two separate ocean basins, two separate threats, and both of them are developing at the exact same time. We're going to cover all of that in this video. There's a lot happening, and I want to make sure you understand every piece of it. Because even though these storms aren't monsters yet, the peak of hurricane season is just around the corner. Let's start with the Atlantic. The tropical Atlantic has been unusually quiet for the past several weeks. Since Tropical Storm Bertha fell apart in mid-July, there hasn't been much activity. Through August 11, it was the least active start to the season since 2009. For a region that sits in the heart of peak hurricane season, that silence has been caused by two very specific things working together. The first is wind shear. Strong vertical wind shear has been set up across the Caribbean and Western Atlantic. What shear does to a developing tropical system is brutal. It basically takes the thunderstorm clusters that are trying to organize and it rips them apart. As one meteorologist put it, the Atlantic is not for the weary of tropical systems right now. The second factor has been the Saharan air layer, a layer of dry, dusty air that gets carried westward across the Atlantic. Right now, it's still active across the Caribbean, affecting air quality and limiting storm development. Forecasters have largely attributed the slowdown to a strengthening El Nino pattern, which increases vertical wind shear across the Atlantic and Caribbean, making it difficult for tropical systems to organize and strengthen. But that silence is ending. The conditions are changing, and that's why we're watching these systems so closely. The Saharan air layer affects everyone in the Caribbean right now, not just in terms of storm development, but in terms of your daily life. It's a layer of dry, dusty air that gets lofted off the Sahara Desert and carried westward across the Atlantic by the trade winds. This happens naturally every year, peaking from late June into mid-August. Right now, it's still active. A new pulse of Saharan dust is expected to reach Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands this weekend. You can see it on satellite imagery as brownish hazes spreading across the Atlantic. If you step outside and the sky looks hazy and pale rather than crisp and blue, that is why. If the air feels thick and you're finding it harder to breathe, that is why. If you have any respiratory conditions, asthma, allergies, this week is a week to be careful. Stay indoors when you can, keep windows closed, avoid outdoor exercise during the hottest parts of the day. On one hand, the dry air acts as an inhibitor for storm development, the same way wind shear does. But the dust isn't covering the entire basin equally. The tropical waves are moving through a southern corridor where there's more moisture available. That's where Invest 92L is operating. Meteorologists describe the current setup as something like a battle zone, with the dry, stable Saharan air dominating the northern half of the main development region, and the moisture intertropical convergence zone pushing along the southern half. Now let's talk about what's already happened in the Atlantic. Tropical Storm Cristobal formed on August 12th, the third named storm of the 2026 Atlantic hurricane season. But here's the twist. It formed in an unexpected place. Cristobal formed from an area of disturbed weather about 1,050 miles east-northeast of Bermuda. Not from the wave farther south that forecasters had been watching more closely. It was one of those curveballs the tropics like to throw at forecasters. The good news is that Cristobal is forecast to be short-lived over the open ocean. It's not expected to pose a threat to land. It will likely dissipate by the end of the week. As one meteorologist put it, if you blinked, you may have missed that Tropical Storm Cristobal formed yesterday and is on the way to dissipating today. Because Cristobal formed from the northern system, the naming sequence has advanced. The next name on the list, the one that will go to Invest 92L if it strengthens, is Dolly. Cristobal has thus far matched Arthur in ASA, which is to say less than 1, basically a rounding error in a typical season, but weak storms count too. Now let's talk about the system that actually matters for the Caribbean. Invest 92L is located about 900 miles west-southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands. The National Hurricane Center has given it an 80% chance of development, a high chance in the next 48 hours. The NHC says a tropical depression will likely form as the system moves westward to west-northwestward across the central tropical Atlantic. The most likely window for development is Thursday to Friday of this week. As one meteorologist noted, I would expect we see a depression out of this within a day or so. If Invest 92L strengthens into a tropical storm, it will be named Dolly, the fourth named system of the season. The models are split, and that matters for who needs to pay attention. If the Bermuda High stays strong and elongated, it could drive Invest 92L westward toward the Lesser Antilles this weekend. In this scenario, the concern would be heavy rainfall, gusty winds, and elevated seas. If 92L struggles, it will likely just keep plodding west into the Caribbean. At that point, it would almost certainly succumb to wind shear. If the Bermuda High weakens, the storm could curve northward and stay over open water. The islands could be spared. If 92L can get a modest organization together, it would be more apt to feel the weakness in between the areas of high pressure in the Atlantic, the escape hatch, if you will. The smart money is to the west into the Caribbean, where doom awaits 92L's future. For now, there's no threat to Florida or the U.S. mainland. The storm would have to survive a wall of wind shear over the Caribbean, and that's a big challenge. AccuWeather describes a possible U.S. impact as a remote possibility. Lead hurricane expert Alex De Silva says that regardless of the intensity of the cyclone, some rain is becoming more likely in the islands this weekend. And that rain would be welcome. The region has been dealing with drought conditions. There's another system behind Invest 92L that deserves some attention. To the east of 92L is the latest Invest 94L. It's currently flagged with 30% development odds. Modeling seems to be very mixed on the future of this system. The AIFS and Euro are a little more excited, whereas Google's modeling is lukewarm. If you look at the AIFS ensemble, you might be saying, but the reality is that we're not sure we even get to this point yet. And this assumes the next wave even develops at all. The overall pattern is supportive of keeping any storm tracking north into the Atlantic out at sea. So if I live on the coast, I wouldn't be sweating either of these waves right now. If 94L can survive the wind shear with some structure intact, it may have a better long-term prognosis than its partner to the west. Now, let me give you specific rain chance breakdowns for the week. The Lesser Antilles, from Martinique and Dominica up through the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, could see heavy rain this weekend if Invest 92L tracks close enough. Puerto Rico could see around an inch or less of rain, depending on the exact track. St. Thomas may see less precipitation due to its location being farther north. For areas that have been sitting in drought conditions, watching the grass go brown and the water levels drop, a good soaking rain is welcome. Trinidad and Tobago. The rain chance is climbing as high as 80% in parts of Trinidad. Some of those showers could be heavy. Localized flooding is possible. Grenada, expect a 60 to 70% chance of rain, climbing to around 80%. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, 70 to 80% chance. Barbados, about a 50% chance of showers. St. Lucia, around 60%. Martinique and Dominica, about a 40% chance. Guadeloupe, around 30%. Puerto Rico, around 30% this week, building toward 40% by the weekend. Everyone there should have eyes on that developing system. Now, let's talk about what's happening in the Pacific, because this one is urgent. There's a tropical disturbance known as Invest 93C, sitting about 100 miles east-southeast of the Hawaiian Islands. It has been reclassified as Potential Tropical Cyclone One-C, and the National Hurricane Center has given it a 90% chance of developing into a tropical depression or named storm within the next 7 days. 90%. That is not a maybe. That is as close to a certainty as forecasters ever get, before a system has officially formed. If it develops into a named tropical storm over the Central Pacific, it will receive the Hawaiian name Lala. Computer models have consistently forecast this system to organize into a tropical depression, then strengthen into Tropical Storm Lala, and Lala's closest pass to the Hawaiian Islands is expected this weekend. On the current schedule, weather conditions on the Big Island will start to deteriorate late Friday, Hawaii time, with the storm passing near or over the islands over the weekend. The system could intensify into a tropical storm or hurricane. Some models show winds reaching around 70 miles per hour, potentially a low-end hurricane. There's still ample uncertainty on the exact track and intensity. The spread among computer models ranges from a track north of the islands to tracks directly over them to tracks well south. The good news is that it does not appear that Invest 93C is going to be a big-time hurricane as it passes Hawaii. The bad news is that we do expect tropical storm impacts in Hawaii by this weekend. This is completely consistent with the pattern that scientists have been forecasting for the Pacific this season. The Central Pacific Hurricane Center predicted an above-normal 2026 season with a 70% chance of above-normal activity. El Nino conditions in the tropical Pacific warm the sea surface temperatures and reduce wind shear, creating much more favorable conditions for tropical cyclone formation and intensification. Systems starting in the eastern Pacific building strength and then moving toward Hawaii. That's a textbook El Nino pattern. The same El Nino that's suppressing Atlantic activity is enhancing Pacific activity. This is the classic seesaw effect that El Nino produces. The Atlantic gets quieter, the Pacific gets busier. The Pacific Basin is telling a different story. While El Nino tends to suppress Atlantic hurricane activity, it often creates conditions that favor more tropical development across parts of the Pacific. So far this year, 7 named storms have formed in the eastern Pacific, including 1 major hurricane. Sea surface temperatures around Hawaii are exceptionally warm, driven by the strengthening El Nino. Those warm waters provide fuel for any system that approaches the islands. If you're in Hawaii, particularly on the Big Island, here's what I want you to do right now. Do not wait for an official warning to start thinking about your preparedness. Check your supplies. Make sure you have water, food, medications, flashlights, batteries, a battery-powered radio. Make preparations by having food and water as well as extra charging equipment for your mobile devices ready. If you live in a low-lying area or in housing vulnerable to strong winds, heavy rain, and elevated tides, know your evacuation route now before you need it. Take the time now to find multiple evacuation routes from your location, in case the preferred one is blocked or jammed. Secure your property. If you have outdoor furniture or anything the wind can pick up, secure it now. Heavy rain can cause flooding and mudslides on Hawaii island slopes. If you live on a hillside or in an area that has flooded before, pay close attention to the forecast updates. Flash flooding and mudslides are possible and could make roads impassable in the Hilo and Honolulu metro areas. Beach and ocean safety. Tides are already elevated and waves will be extremely large, even if the storm misses. Large waves and dangerous rip currents will be possible as the system moves west near the islands. Another potential risk is wildfire ahead of the storm as winds increase and humidity drops. The system is pulling in drier air on its backside, and strong downslope winds will cause humidity to drop, increasing fire danger. The bottom line for this week is that you need to be watching 2 things simultaneously. Invest 92L, 80% chance of developing. It could bring heavy rain to the northeastern Caribbean this weekend. The next name is Dolly. There's no U.S. threat at this time. Invest 94L, 30% chance of developing. Models are mixed on this system. It could have a better long-term prognosis than 92L if it survives the shear. Invest 93C, 90% chance of becoming Tropical Storm Lala. The Big Island of Hawaii is in the crosshairs. Impacts expected this weekend. Heavy rain, flash flooding, and gusty, possibly damaging winds expected. The next 24 to 48 hours of model runs are going to be very telling. I will be watching every update that comes in. We are rapidly approaching the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season, which falls around September 10th. The Atlantic is becoming increasingly active as we approach that peak, but Hawaii may face the more immediate tropical threat this week. If this video helped you understand what's happening, hit that like button, because it helps more people find these forecasts when they need them most. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you get the next update the moment it goes live. Drop a comment and let me know, are you in the path of either of these systems? And if this helped you, check out my video on the Western wildfires. Stay informed, stay prepared, stay safe. I'll see you in the next one.